Welcome back to another edition of the Night Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me once again is my co-host, Richie O'Leary, and special guest this week to discuss everything Washington Huskies, Christian Caple. He's the co-host of the Say Who, Say Pod podcast and the publisher of On Montlake. Christian, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first off, I need to know, what's the story behind the name of the Say Who, Say Pod?
So there's this chant that the team does that started in like the mid 1970s, and there's an expletive in there, and there's more to it, but it's known as the Say Who chant, where it starts Say Who, Say What, and so we started the podcast in 2021 and kind of crowdsourced like what would be a good name, and that was one that was suggested, and so the intro, our intro actually is it's a clip of the chant, but with me deadpanning the word pod over the word what. And that's become a fairly popular staple, I think, among our listeners.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I forgot to thank our sponsor before we start this, though. This podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. If you wanted to get in on the action, the spread in this game is currently sitting at 10.5. 59.5 point over under. I hope by the end of this podcast, you have a good feeling on where you should be betting your hard-earned dollars for this game. But you guys had one hell of a comeback last week at Maryland. You guys were down 20-0 early in the third quarter, found a way to kind of mount a very impressive road win. What do you kind of point to as like the main factor as to why you guys were able to just mount such an impressive comeback at Maryland?
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of just started playing. It was, I've said this a couple times in the last few days, like usually, a multi-score, 3-score comeback starting in the third quarter, you're going to see some sort of special team score, right? A block punt or a kick return touchdown or a pick six or a turnover deep in opponent territory that like gets you an immediate 7 points and quickly turns the momentum. But this was just punt, touchdown, which I don't think you see a lot in a game where one team is leading 20-0, one possession into the third quarter. So, I think they settled down offensively. Damon Williams Jr. threw kind of an uncharacteristic interception in the first quarter and seemed like maybe that affected him a bit going forward. They talked about Maryland kind of rolling its coverage toward Denzel Boston and trying to take away deep throws. I think they did a good job finding those sort of underneath routes to their tight end, Decker DeGraff, and did hit one deep shot that they were able to get the look that they wanted to Desmond Roebuck, and that was maybe like the one really big play you'd point to as a 34-yard touchdown pass. So, Maryland wasn't like they were great at converting third downs in the first half, and that was sort of what allowed them to continue to possess the ball and put 13 points on the board. But they really weren't like crazy efficient offensively for any stretch of this game. And I think that over the course of 4 quarters, the game really just kind of came back to Washington, and they were able to finish drives in the red zone and score touchdowns when they got down there, which had been an issue for them against Ohio State. I think that'll probably be an issue for pretty much everybody against Ohio State. But I think it's maybe an obvious answer, but they kind of just started playing the way that you would think they would play against a team like Maryland that, I think is pretty good, but that Washington probably feels it has a bit of a talent edge over.
Jedd Fisch, Jersey boy, like myself and Mike here. Let me ask you about him. First, I want to kind of do a two-parter. Like, what was the vibe around the program when they hired him originally, and what's the vibe kind of now?
Yeah, I mean, the vibe was total gut punch. Mm-hmm. They'd played in the national championship game, on January 8th, lost to Michigan, which hurt. But, I think if Kalen DeBoer doesn't immediately leave for Alabama, like people would have come back to just being really happy with the season pretty quickly rather than like devastated over losing in the title game. But Kalen DeBoer leaves for Alabama 4 days later. And people were crushed. People felt not just like, okay, what's this going to do to the program? The roster is going to be in disarray. You're going to lose all these guys to the portal. You're going to lose all these guys who signed in the 2024 recruiting class. But also, I think one sentiment I heard a lot was that people felt like they were kind of robbed of the chance to celebrate what by any measure was one of the greatest seasons in Washington history. So you immediately go into, who can you hire to kind of stop the bleeding a little bit? Who can bring some players with them? That type of thing. I think Jedd Fisch emerged pretty quickly as like one of the top 2 or 3 candidates that probably everybody had on their list, right? He was a head coach in the same conference, not anymore, but that they'd been in forever together with. They'd played his team just that year and the year before and the year before. Like, people were plenty familiar with who he was. Obviously someone who recruits in the same areas geographically in the West Coast and everything, has an offensive background, and most importantly had taken Arizona from a 1-11 team in his first year to 10-3 and beating Oklahoma in a bowl game in year 3. So I think people were pretty pleased with the hire. The vibe still wasn't good, just because I think people knew what a huge challenge it was going to be to build the roster back up. And, they were going to lose a ton no matter what. Like, Kalen DeBoer was looking at a rebuilding job of his own, but with the continuity that comes with being a third-year coaching staff. So, Michael Penix and Romo Dunze and Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan and Roger Rosengarten and Troy Fautanu, and they had all these guys drafted, and they were going to lose all those guys no matter what. It was going to be a very different roster, but people were pretty down after coming off a national championship game appearance. It was a strange time.
And talking about kind of, the state of the roster for this year, you guys have kind of dealt with a bit of a tidal wave in terms of injuries, not just to, starting players, but like some of the key cogs of what makes this team go right now. And you could kind of give an update on these, but left tackle Carver Willis missed last week's game, who arguably is your best offensive lineman. Starting left guard John Mills, who true freshman. You don't see many true freshmen starting along a Big Ten offensive line. He left the game apparently against Maryland in a boot. You guys were without your top pass rusher Zach Durfee last week. You're without your best, arguably, defensive back in Takario Davis last week. You lost one of your starting linebackers against Washington State in Buddha. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name. Where are you guys at injury-wise, and how many of those guys that I mentioned are you expecting to miss Friday night's game?
It seems like of that group, they're probably most optimistic that Takario Davis can play on Friday. He's missed 3 games with a rib injury. He traveled with the team to Maryland and worked out before the game. They just didn't feel like he could go. So they're talking about him like they're maybe a little more hopeful this week. So we'll see. I don't expect Carver Willis to play. He had a huge brace on his leg on the sideline there at Maryland. John Mills was in a walking boot and had crutches on the sideline. So Jedd Fisch didn't give a real definitive update on his status on Monday, but just based on what we saw in College Park with where his foot was at, I guess it'd be a surprise at this point if he played. And no real definitive update on Zach Durfee either, but I don't believe he made the trip to Maryland and came out of the Ohio State game with an injury. So I'd be surprised to see him miss just one game as well. Buddha Alukta is out for the season. So they're going to have to deal with his absence the rest of the way too. But yeah, I mean, this is a beat up team, especially defensively. I think they built better depth over this offseason. They feel like the rotational guys and their backups are probably better positioned to contribute than they were a year ago, but they definitely have kind of run into a crush of injuries to pretty key players here.
That's 2 straight games now that Carver Willis has dodged Rutgers in. If you count the Kansas State bowl game. So I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe he's just doing it on purpose. But offense, Washington's offense is phenomenal. There's no other way to put it. You have a really good running back, a really good quarterback, a really good wide receiver. Like you just mentioned, the offensive line's hurt. But what's your just kind of high-level thoughts on this offense this season?
Yeah, I mean, it all centers around, like you said, Damon Williams Jr., Jonah Coleman, and Denzel Boston. I mean, they feel like they can put a lot on those guys. Denzel Boston is what he is as a receiver, but also is their primary punt returner, has a punt return touchdown. They've been throwing the ball to Jonah Coleman a lot more. You look at his numbers against Maryland, and it's like, 18 carries for 57 yards. Like, that's not great. But then 8 catches for 47 yards. And he's, they find a way to get him over 100 yards from scrimmage. And I think he's second in the country, third in the country, and in scrimmage yards per game right now. Leads the country with 11 total touchdowns. And Damon Williams Jr. obviously is very dynamic and can do a lot with his legs. They had 2 rushes longer than 10 yards against Maryland. He had both of them. It was a 20-yard scramble and then a 10-yard design run that actually got their last first down that they needed to run the clock out. So they feel really good about their core. There's some questions on the offensive line now. That was a question mark over the offseason just because that group was so lacking last year, and they reinforced it, went out and got Carver Willis from the transfer portal to be their starting left tackle. They really liked John Mills. You mentioned a true freshman, but he's huge, right? You wouldn't assume he was a freshman just based on seeing him walking around. They like the progress they made there, but now you're talking about Mills probably being out, Carver Willis being out. They're relying on their depth in a way that, again, I think they're better positioned to do there than they were a year ago. But there is a drop off there. And you saw that against Maryland, kind of getting some pressure around the edge in particular. So that'll kind of be an area to watch going forward, I think. But they start 2 true freshman receivers as well, a sophomore tight end, Decker DeGraff, who they feel really good about. And that's really been the guys who play the majority of the snaps. They don't go super deep at receiver. They like to play their top 3 or 4. They like Adam Mohammed behind Jonah Coleman, running back. He's a sophomore, and I think they'll kind of make the handoff to him as RB1 next year as a junior, but he influences the game too. So, I think the pieces are in place for them to probably make a bigger leap in year 3 if they can maintain everybody in health and all those things. But I think they feel good about where they're at offensively this year.
One thing I kind of noticed is if you look at like kind of the high level numbers for your offense, like there's not many areas of weakness that you can point to, whether it be from PFF, whether it be from an EPA perspective. Like you guys are 10th overall in the country in adjusted EPA per play, 14th in EPA per dropback, 5th in EPA per rush. But the one kind of glaring thing that I noticed was you guys allow a lot of sacks and have a lot of tackles for loss. Is that kind of an isolated thing? Does that show up on tape? Do you guys find that, maybe there's some bad like kind of do your best to kind of explain like the negative plays allowed for this offense?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is they played Ohio State, right? Like
Sure.
Damon Williams got sacked 6 times in that game. I think Ohio State had 9 TFLs. But if you're critiquing Washington's passing offense, I think one thing is that Damon Williams tends to hold on to the ball a little too long at times. And like Jedd Fisch has talked about not wanting to necessarily coach that all the way out of him because he is so dynamic with his legs that like you want him to have that latitude to buy time and extend plays and, keep it alive and keep his eyes downfield and those sort of things. And when you have a quarterback with that mentality, like he's going to get sacked sometimes. So I think they've run the ball decently well. This wasn't their best game against Maryland running wise, but other than against, you throw out the Ohio State game and Jonah Coleman was pretty darn good in their non-conference slate, which I suppose isn't saying a whole lot based on level of competition. But yeah, I mean, I think Damon Williams got sacked 10 times at Oregon last year and another 5 in their bowl game. And they had a lot of issues on the offensive line last season, but some of it also is you've got a playmaker at quarterback who likes to use his legs to not even necessarily, I mean, you've seen how good he can be scrambling. I think he would prefer to use his legs to just buy time in the passing game first. And sometimes that does lead to holding onto the ball a little too long and taking a sack. And, there's been a free runner or 2 at times. There's been maybe an inability to pick up a stunt at times on the D line that's collapsed the pocket a bit. But most of those problems, not all of them, but most of those problems, I think you saw pop up against an Ohio State defense that was just absolutely lights out. And I think it's probably going to do that to everybody this year. Maybe not. Maybe they won't have 6 sacks against everybody, but athletically, at least, the matchup was a daunting one.
Yeah, I don't think there's any denying that they're the best defense in college football this year. I'm certainly not looking forward to when Rutgers has to play them in late November. I don't think we match up well. I don't think anybody matches up well with that defense generally. But I have noticed that about Damon Williams as well. He kind of has a little bit of like Kyler Murray in him, where he likes to kind of get outside the pocket, but not necessarily scramble. Like he clearly can do it whenever he wants, but he's always got his eyes downfield and kind of takes what's given to him when it's there, but definitely wants to, extend plays to throw, not extend plays to eventually take off, it seems. But one thing I also kind of thought was interesting, you guys obviously put up a ton of points, but you outscored opponents 73-10 in the fourth quarter this year. That's almost 40% of your total points this season have come in the fourth quarter. Has it been slow starts, or is just kind of like, blowouts have kind of like snowballed in the fourth quarter? What do you kind of point to for all the fourth quarter scoring?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, 3 of their first 5 opponents were Colorado State, UC Davis, and Washington State. And, where Washington has a pretty distinct size and speed and talent advantage. And, that's going to bear out most, I think, in the fourth quarter. I don't know exactly what the numbers were coming off that. I mean, Washington State in particular, like that was a close, stressful game until it very suddenly wasn't. And
I think
suddenly
you guys outscored them 28-0 in the fourth.
Yeah, you look up and they're up by 4 scores, and so that accounts for a lot of it. And then also Maryland, right? They're down 20-3 going into the fourth and scored 21 straight points there. So yeah, some of it is slow starts. Some of it is, like at UC Davis is a game that's over at halftime, but they just were never stopped. Even when they put their second team offense in, they scored on every possession. So I think I don't think they scored in the fourth quarter against Ohio State. So yeah, I think some of it has just been sort of the game coming back to them a little bit, and the general like talent gap that they've had in 4 of the 5 games that they've played. Not as pronounced against Maryland, certainly, as the first 3, but showing up and maybe taking a while to show up.
Demon Williams, I want to go back to him just a little bit, just because he's been like phenomenal this year. 73% completion percentage, doesn't really throw picks. He's mobile, like you said. He's a true dual threat. He's on the smaller side, but I think that's like the only knock on him, right? Like, is that about it?
Yeah, I mean, he takes good care of the ball. The 2 like really good athletic defenses that recruit at a top 10 level nationally that he's played, Oregon and Ohio State, have sacked him a combined 16 times. So, like there's some of, who's going to be really good against those teams, but also like you're in the Big Ten. Those are the types of defenses you're going to have to beat if you think that this is a program that should compete for a playoff spot year in and year out. So maybe it's TBD. It's not all on the quarterback either, right? Like you got to match up 1 through 11 to move the ball and score points against elite defenses. But yeah, I think he, the things you really key on for a young starter are poise and decision making. And I think he's pretty good in both areas. There's room for improvement there. I think you did see him get a little rattled in the first half against Maryland. There were some spots against Ohio State where maybe he tried to make something happen, or was a split second late on a scramble decision and paid for it. He gets hit a lot. I think that's something that they have tried to work on, but also that Jedd Fisch talks about, like, hey, he's been this size his whole life and he's played this way his whole life. Like, he's going to run and create huge chunk plays in the open field, and he's going to get hit sometimes. Like, it's fine. It's football. He knows how to protect himself. He does always pop up pretty quickly. I've never seen him like stay down for longer than a beat after getting hit, but a guy who is that size, as you mentioned, you wonder, how many of those can he take? At what point is that going to take its toll? I know they wanted him to get up to 200 pounds this year, and he's definitely added weight. I don't know if he quite got there or not, but yeah, it as far as going through progressions, I think there's room for development there. And when the first read isn't there, how quickly does he move on to his second and his third, and how decisive is he within that progression? I think that's something to keep an eye on going forward. But for a guy who's, I guess he has started 7 games now, 5 this year and 2 last year. I think he's probably ahead of schedule as far as what your average sophomore starting quarterback looks like.
Let's talk about the pass catchers. Obviously, Denzel Boston is the clear wide receiver one on this group. He's getting a ton of NFL draft praise, maybe even the guy who sneaks into the first round. What is it that he does so well that gets him all this attention?
Yeah, I mean he's 6'4". You start there. He can go up and high point the ball against smaller defensive backs. I think last year what I was really waiting to see, and the one game where you did see this was at Rutgers, was yards after the catch, right? Like how much damage can he do in space if they can get him isolated, like on a quick slant or something. Yeah, I think he's kind of shown a little more burst and explosiveness this year. I think he's a pretty good blocker. And he's a true red zone threat too. He can go up and get fade balls. They hit him on a slant at Maryland for a touchdown. And he's just his size, his ball tracking ability, how competitive he is when the ball's in the air, his ability to make contested catches. When he's the kind of like Rome Odunze, he's the guy when Damon Williams sees him out there with man coverage, with one-on-one coverage, it's going to him. They seem to have pretty good chemistry. He works the back shoulder throw well to him when that opportunity is there. And he catches everything. He's got very sure hands. You don't see him drop the ball. And I think he's proving a little more this year too, that he's harder to tackle. I think he's a little more tougher runner, and I think has the ability to get a little bit more done after the catch as well.
So, go on.
And one other pass catcher I wanted to touch on was Decker DeGraff. He started to kind of have his breakout last week. He had 6 catches for 61 yards against Maryland. He had 2 for 24 against Ohio State. Seems to be a guy that Damon Williams kind of looks to across the middle. I know he got a decent amount of playing time as a freshman last year, but what have you seen from his development this year? And do you think this breakout will continue as the season continues on?
Yeah, I mean they've definitely viewed him as like a major potential offensive weapon for them. I mean, 15 catches for 200 some yards as a true freshman last year. Really did a lot of damage down the field, wheel routes. I think his first play ever in college was a touchdown catch in their first game. This game against Maryland, I think, is kind of what people envisioned him being on a week in, week out basis. Like, it's not been the primary storyline around this team, but through the first 4 games, there's definitely been some people wondering, like, where is Decker DeGraff? If you feel like Ohio State is scheming to take away the deep ball, or that anybody's rolling coverage to Denzel Boston or whatever, like, shouldn't this really good playmaking pass catching tight end give you a little more underneath or down the field? I think they hit one seam route to him at Ohio State for a big gain. And Jedd Fisch talked about that maybe being like a confidence builder. And then, Maryland, what was 6 catches for 60 some yards. He's got the potential, I think, to be a chain mover for them, and someone who can get open, can make plays downfield. I think he's a pretty natural athlete, runs well with the ball in his hands. They definitely see him as like a very big part of their future. And I think, this game he had against Maryland is kind of what people thought would be the norm more so than the exception. And so maybe it does propel them, because I think they're going to continue to see teams dedicate coverage to try to take Denzel Boston away, or at least limit his one-on-one opportunities on go balls. So, if that's what you're going to dedicate your defensive resources to, then you need someone like your starting tight end to step up.
But before we go too far away from the receivers, Amari Evans, what happened to him? Because he was at one time a Rutgers lean. He started at Penn State, and now he's just not even playing at this point. Or
yeah, I mean, he came in the spring and got hurt, and then when training camp started, I think they'd kind of moved him to the slot, trying to see if that would be a good fit, because they didn't really have any experience returning there. And just never really separated. And then he had a hamstring injury that kept him out of their first 2 games. He debuted against Wazoo and then played some. And he had a couple plays against Ohio State that moved the chains for them, and that kind of helped. I think they hit him down the field for 20 some yards. Had one play where it looked like he made a great play to juke a defender, but his knee hit the ground. And then, didn't really, I don't know if he played at all, or maybe just a little bit at Maryland. I think he did. Yeah, now that I think about it, I think he did play some. But they really like Desmond Roebuck, true freshman on the outside, who had a touchdown catch at Maryland, and they really like Raiden Vinesbright, a true freshman, who won the starting slot job out of training camp. I think they feel like those guys fit their offense better right now, and they must have just made more plays in training camp. But that's the one area where, at least on the, well, I was going to say that where they've stayed healthy, but I've already forgotten they lost Rashid Williams, who was going to be their number 2 receiver in their second game. So, Evans is the kind of guy, he's right there. I think he's you'd say he's probably their number 4 receiver right now. They really like their top 3. And so there just hasn't been a lot of snaps for anybody else.
Yeah, I always thought he could have been really talented. I mean, 4.3 guy out of high school, like he was fast as shit. But
he's fast. That's why they wanted him. They wanted more speed, but he just didn't win the job.
Yeah, it's a shame. But going hand in hand with injuries, offensive line you mentioned before might or more likely will be missing Carver Willis and John Mills. How do you kind of replace those guys, and do they have guys that can step up and be just as serviceable, if not better?
Yeah, I mean, at left guard, it was a battle all spring in camp between John Mills and Paki Finau, who's a redshirt freshman, who was a 4-star recruit in the 2024 class. So, yeah, that seems like a pretty seamless. In fact, they rotated him in like every third series in their first 2 or 3 games because they do really like him. I think they see him as a part of the future too. So that's a pretty natural, he's at least played. He's got some experience this year. Maximus McCree stepped in at left tackle for Carver Willis. He actually would have been their starting left tackle like basically all of last season and won the job like 3 games into the year, and then broke his thumb, dislocated his thumb against Iowa, and then missed a bunch of time. So, they went out and got Carver Willis for a reason, right? They wanted a veteran starter there. So they did effectively recruit over the top of their other options, Max McCree being one of them. But they've always said that they liked him. He's got kind of an interesting path. Took a year away from, had played JUCO, then went to Maryland for a year, took a year away from football to care for his parents. His mom had gotten sick, and his dad, I think, had a workplace injury. And so, he was out of football for a while. He hadn't played in a football game for a while when he came to Washington last year. And so there was I think a bit of an acclimation period to shake the rust off and also get bigger and those sort of things. So he's probably going to get his second start of the year, I would imagine, on Friday.
Is it safe to say that the offensive line is the biggest area of concern for you in terms of Washington's offense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they've got stars, borderline superstars at quarterback, running back, and receiver. The receiver depth is not experienced, right? You're starting 2 true freshmen, and so there's going to be some growing pains there. I think they like what they have at tight end. Quentin Moore is a senior too, who's more of the kind of the inline run blocker. Yeah, I mean, other than maybe like receiver depth, I do think, especially with the injuries, the O-line is kind of the biggest question mark going forward.
Last one I got for you about the offense. How do you kind of see them matching up with this Rutgers defense? Because Rutgers has struggled with mobile quarterbacks. Rutgers has struggled with running backs. Rutgers has struggled with a pass rush. So basically everything Washington has. Yeah,
I mean, I think against anybody, their preference is to run the ball and to establish the run. I don't think they want Damon Williams Jr. throwing the ball 40 times in a game. They feel like they've got one of the best running backs in the country in Jonah Coleman, and they really like his backup, right? And, whether it is literally the run game or catching the ball, I mean, Jonah Coleman had 26 touches against Maryland. So it kind of, as much as Damon Williams Jr. obviously is their most important player, like as far as carrying the football, touching the football, like Jonah Coleman's going to do that more than anybody. So, I think it doesn't change a ton unless you're playing like the elite of the elite, and then you're trying to scheme around your weaknesses a little bit. But I think they're going to want to run the ball and build play action off of it, and pick their spots to call a design run for Damon Williams Jr., which they haven't done a ton. They do it enough to keep the defense honest. But one thing, I think you saw him be a little more decisive on taking off and taking available yards in the scramble game. against Maryland, where in the first half there were maybe times where it's like, why is he holding on to the ball? Like, seems like there's room to take off here. So maybe he'll be a little more decisive that way in this game as well.
All right, let's transition to the defense. Ryan Walters took over this offseason, replacing Rutgers alum Stephen Belichick, who went and became his dad's ODC at North Carolina. Ryan Walters is known for having a very unique and aggressive defense, showing a lot of different fronts in his scheme. How would you say his defense has performed overall this season? Because it doesn't seem like a trademark Ryan Walters defense. Like, you guys aren't getting a ton of sacks, aren't getting a ton of negative plays. Like, I think the havoc rate you guys have this year is relatively low across when compared to FBS teams. Talk about the defense and kind of if it's been what you thought it would be so far.
Yeah, maybe not as heavy up front with 5 down fronts. I was kind of expecting a lot of that. And, there's different ways to put 5 guys on the line of scrimmage other than, 3 sort of interior D linemen and 2 edges, right? You can walk your linebacker down. You can walk a safety down. They were pretty vanilla, I think, through their first 3 games. With Tacario Davis being out, I think maybe like you're not seeing as much press man on the outside. I know against Ohio State, like they played a lot of 3 safeties, wanting to really limit big plays, right? You're going up against Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate with no Tacario Davis. Like, the priority was don't let anybody get behind you. And I think like Ohio State came in with a pretty conservative game plan anyway. And then against Maryland, like that's not a super explosive passing offense. They throw the ball a lot, but it's a lot of quick throws. And, I think they did a pretty good job containing and like limiting yards after catch and everything. So yeah, I mean, Zach Durfee being out doesn't help the pass rush. Certainly Russell Davis II, who's another guy who probably would have played a lot on the edge. I think had a knee injury in the summer and is out for the season too. So I know they want to get more out of their pass rush, but I think also feel like they're playing well enough up front. I thought they matched up with Ohio State's run game decently well, all things considered. They averaged 4.5 yards per carry or so. And I think moved the ball decently well on them. But it wasn't like this just overwhelming 6.5 yards per carry. Oh my gosh, they just can't match up with these guys type of display. So, again, pretty conservative game plan for Ohio State. So it's hard to like take a ton from that. But yeah, I think they've maybe played a little bit softer coverage without Tacario Davis. They're starting a true freshman there now. We'll see if he comes, when he comes back, if they do get a little more aggressive as far as wanting to leave those guys out on an island a little bit more and dedicating more to the box and more to the pass rush. But I think some of it has been, just trying to limit big plays and force teams to finish drives against them.
Defensive line, you guys are similar to Rutgers in the aspect of there's a ton of transfers on not just the 2 deep, but it even looks like the 3 deep. How have those guys kind of adjusted? I know you just mentioned that they're kind of struggling a little bit in pass rush. And who would you say, I guess, is like their main guy to watch out for on that defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, they've mostly started Taitai Uyunglele, who's a transfer from Arizona, and Ontario Thompson, is a transfer from Western Michigan via junior college in Iowa. And Alinius Davis, who came to Washington out of high school. So yeah, with Durfee out, they're leaning a lot on Isaiah Ward, who was a transfer from Arizona last year, Deshaun Lynch, who was a transfer from Sacramento State last year, and Jacob Lane, who I think has been kind of their most consistent edge rusher so far. I think they feel like they're a lot deeper on the interior D line than they were last year, just as far as like being able to roll 5 or 6 guys through and not feeling like there's a huge drop off from, your number 2 guy to your number 5 guy. Whereas last year, Javon Parker tore his Achilles at Rutgers, I think was kind of emerging in that game to be their best D lineman. And now Jedd Fisch says this is the kind of the week where it looks like he's probably going to return from that injury. And I think he returns to a D-line room that has like built a lot more depth around him, such that like I don't think they felt like they had to rush him back. So that maybe gives you like a little bit of context on how they've grown there. But yeah, I think it's been a group that's like held up well enough and is like kind of done their job more so than really imposed itself on opposing offenses. This was a team last year that was like toward the bottom of the FBS in tackles for loss per game. You're not seeing like a ton of progress there, but you're also not seeing opposing offenses really be like explosive against them either.
Let's talk about the next level up on the defense, the linebacker group. I know you already talked about losing one starting linebacker for the year. I know Jacob Manu was kind of thrust into a starting role last week. And I think he was expected to redshirt, and Devin Bryant's the other starter there. Talk about the linebacker group in general and how they've performed so far this year.
Yeah, they're very fortunate on the timeline of Jacob Manu's return. He tore his ACL playing for Arizona last October. I thought looked really good in fall camp. He was limited, but was, he's the kind of guy they talk about, like, you got to hold him back. He's very aggressive. He wants to play. You saw him going through drills like full speed, and he didn't look like a guy who'd torn his ACL several months prior. So he's played very well since coming back. Unfortunate injury for Buda Alukta. He transferred from Washington State. He suffered that season-ending leg injury against Washington State in the second half of that game. So that's a tough loss for them. They do get Zadrius Rainey-Saleh back this week, true freshman who tore his ACL last November. I don't know how much they're going to be able to rely on him right away, but yeah, at Maryland, it was Devin Bryant and Jacob Manu, and X-Ray Alexander is another transfer from UCF who's bulked up to like 240 pounds, kind of on the bigger side. They could maybe use him like as a pass rusher off the edge if they want to as well. But there's not a ton of depth there. And especially if they do decide to redshirt Jacob Manu, that's still a decision that they can make. He's played 2 games, so he's got at least 2 left. With the way he's playing, I'd have a hard time seeing them taking him off the field. And he's not the kind of guy who wants to sit if he's healthy and can play football. So that's TBD. But if you take him out of the equation, it does start to get pretty thin there.
Last but not least, the secondary. It seems like they've been pretty good, minus Tacario Davis not being there. They held arguably the best wide receiver room. They're pretty good numbers against Ohio State a couple weeks ago. Jeremiah Smith had 80 yards. That's a win in most people's books. So just kind of break down that unit. I know McLaughlin's probably the name I want to hear about the most.
Yeah, transfer from Northern Arizona. I think had a preferred walk-on offer to play for Jedd Fisch at Arizona. He's an Arizona guy and chose to take the scholarship at Northern Arizona, was a Big Sky All-American. Was super productive, and we're seeing this at Washington too, was super productive at Northern Arizona, intercepting the ball, forcing fumbles, tackles for loss, rushing the passer, blitzing, sacking the quarterback. He's a very good tackler. That was the first thing you noticed watching him in spring and training camp. And I think their first couple games against Colorado State and UC Davis, that's been a very welcome sight for Husky fans. The tackling on the back end of the secondary had been a little suspect at times over the last few years. So, and he's just he's really versatile too, right? He's the kind of guy who they could put 6 DBs on the field, but if he's one of them, he can also function as a linebacker because he's 6'2" and 200 pounds and tackles really well and has that very aggressive physical mentality. So he's the kind of guy who's always around the ball, who he's kind of got a nose for contact, and it's amazing how often he's the first guy there. Looks like, if he stays healthy and all those sort of things, it'd be pretty surprising if he doesn't lead the team in tackles this year. So that's been a big addition for them at safety. They got a senior, a 6th-year senior, Mikel Esteen, who starts beside him, who's played a lot of football for them over the years. Ephesians Prysock was one of their 2 6'4" starting corners, and with Tacario Davis out, they play a true freshman, Dylan Robinson, who's 6'3" and 200 pounds too, and was one of their.
You guys have a type, huh?
One of their best, probably their biggest recruiting win in the 2025 class. 4-star guy out of Laverne, California. I guess final 3 were Washington, Notre Dame, and UCLA, and those 3 schools wanted him at corner, safety, and receiver. So maybe not in that order. I think Notre Dame wanted him at receiver. So very versatile, good athlete. He's a true freshman. You've seen him get beat a couple times. There's going to be some growing pains there, but at least physically, they feel like he can do some of the same things that they ask of Tacario Davis.
And if you had to kind of point to your biggest area of concern, particularly with how they match up against this Rutgers offense, where would you point to?
Yeah, I think it's it kind of depends a little bit on whether Tacario Davis plays or not. Without him against Washington State, a team that, I mean, they just lost to North Texas 59-10 or something. Granted, they'd finally figured out who their starting quarterback was supposed to be and started the right guy against Washington. They gave up a lot of big plays in the passing game in the secondary, which you wouldn't necessarily expected. And so that kind of threw up an alarm flag of like, is this what it's going to look like without Tacario Davis? So, you know, whether he plays or maybe he plays and he's limited or whatever the case may be, I do think like there's a reason they've kind of rolled coverage to keep things in front of them. I know Ethan Kelly-McManus is having a lot better year throwing the ball this year than he did last year. So, you know, maybe that's probably the area that I would watch. You know, that they're beat up too, right? You talk about kind of that lacking pass rush and what does it look like at the second level at linebacker. Getting Javon Parker back will help, but yeah, I'm probably going into every game. I'm kind of watching like, can the secondary hold up and prove that, you know, I thought coming into the year they were going to be a big strength, and there's been times when they've shown that. I thought against Maryland they did a good job limiting big plays and, like I said, closing on some of those short throws to the flat and screens and those sort of things. And so, you know, how are they going to do limiting yards after catch, not letting quick throws become long gains, those sort of things. That's what's hurt them a little bit.
And the third phase of the game, special teams. I know it was a bit of house of horrors last year for the Washington special teams at Rutgers, missing 3 kicks. You block a kick on the other end, and you have one of the more ridiculous penalties that I think I've ever seen at a game when they had an illegal celebration or something like that. How's the special teams unit as a whole played this season, and do you view that as kind of a strength, a neutral, or a weakness of the team?
Yeah, it's a little TBD. I think the punt unit has not been awesome. Their kickoff returns have been very good. I think, you know, they do have a punt return touchdown. Granted, it was against UC Davis, but, you know, they're one of their best athletes is back there returning punts, Denzel Boston. I think he's done pretty good. As far as, do I fair catch this? Do I have room to get a couple yards here? I think he's made pretty good decisions that way. So you'd call that a win. I think Grady Gross is having a good year, kicking field goals. He's done what they've asked of him after having, you know, Rutgers in particular was a rough go for him last season. You cut that game out and really his whole career looks pretty good. There were a couple games before and after that where maybe he missed one here or there, but you know, they had some coverage issues against Colorado State in their opener. I think that's mostly been addressed. They have a kickoff specialist, Ethan Machowski, who they went out and got, I think, specifically to handle just kickoffs, and he frequently puts the ball through the end zone, which is not something that they've had for a while. So, you know, frankly, like they're not covering a lot of kickoffs, which is, I think, how they want it. So certainly they've upgraded. They devoted a lot of resources to it. They hired 2 new coaches who only coach special teams, including one, Chris Petrilli, who came from Purdue and has that connection with Ryan Walters. So I think they've taken a step forward there for sure. I don't think they're quite where they want to be. I think the punt game, though they'd rather not punt that many times, I think the punt game has probably the most room to improve.
And we've reached the point in the program where we're going to talk a little bit about some predictions now. We've kind of given the layout of everything for the Washington Huskies, offense, defense, special teams. Is there anything you wanted to ask us before we get into predictions about Rutgers, or any specific questions that you had on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I would just I'd be curious to know how you think this team is most different than the one that beat Washington in New Jersey last year.
I think the biggest difference is the quantum leap this passing attack has taken. They have 2, maybe 3 guys, depending on who you ask, that are starting that are legitimate NFL prospects. And I think Ethan has really kind of, last season coming into 2024, he was in a quarterback battle. He was a new transfer. He was still kind of assimilating to the organization. But this offseason, it was just, he was the unquestioned starter. He kind of felt ownership around the team, so I think that made him feel more comfortable, and it shows on the field. He just looks comfortable out there. Rich, I don't know if you kind of had anything that you wanted to add on there.
I mean, that's pretty much it. On top of the fact of having the same offensive coordinator for technically the 3rd year in a row, if you count his time at Minnesota with Kirk. But I mean, how many quarterbacks can really say that in today's day and age of college football? Like, not many, if any, right now. So
Sure.
I think he's just really mastered the playbook. It's very simplified too. It's basically doesn't really go past his first read very often, but he can if he has to. And like Mike said, the wide receiver room is just there's 2 future NFL players, if not 3, if you talk to some people. So it makes life pretty easy when you can do that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of shines a light on their wide receiver coach. Dave Brock was the longtime wide receiver coach for the Atlanta Falcons. He's coached for 20 plus years. I think you look at all the places on the offense that have taken significant leaps. Offensive line, Pat Flaherty's their offensive line coach. He was the New York Giants offensive line coach for 20 years. Uh, Kirk Soraka has been an offensive coordinator at the Power 4 level for over a decade. So like the experience is really kind of shining into the players, where on the defense, it's a lot of youth, a lot of green coaches that don't have that level of experience. And I think that's kind of, in part at least, why we've seen the struggles on defense. But all right, let's talk predictions. Christian, you're the guest. We'll allow you to give your thoughts on how this game goes and what do you think the score ends up being in this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a bit of a fight. Friday game coming back from the East Coast, though it was not a late kick on the East Coast, and coming back, you do get that time back going east to west. Against another team coming off a bye, so it's 3 straight for Washington. I think that matters a little bit. Maybe not so much playing at home. As beat up as they are, and with the short turnaround, I think Rutgers covers. I'm going to say Washington 31, Rutgers 23. Got to pick a little bit of a weird total.
Almost a scoregami, yeah. All right, Rich, how do you see this one going?
Parker Navarro, Daquan Finn, Mark Gronowski, Demon Williams. What do they all have in common? They're all mobile. Rutgers cannot stop a mobile quarterback, and we're dating back to Greg Schiano 1.0 when he was back here from 2002 to 2011. He cannot stop. He cannot figure out how the hell mobile quarterbacks work. They try to put contain on them. They break contain every time, and then they either are running down the field buck wild or they're chucking the ball down the field to someone like maybe Boston this weekend. I just can't in confidence say that Rutgers has a shot in this one. I'm very confident in this Washington offense. I think they're going to give Rutgers defense fits. On top of it, Jonah Coleman, who you just mentioned, is pretty damn good, if not the best Big Ten running back right now. So I think that combination with Rutgers defense just struggling, I felt a little bit more confident finding out that like Willis and Mills are probably out for them on an offensive line, but I'm still confident they're going to put up a lot of points on this Rutgers defense. And despite the bye week, which usually helps Greg Schiano, I don't think it's going to change a whole lot because it's still the same players, it's still the same personnel for the most part. So I'm going to say Rutgers. What is it, 10.5 right now, or is it 9.5? Because it keeps
10.5 right now.
It is 10.5. 34-24. Washington's going to win this one. Rutgers technically covers, and it just misses the over.
Yeah, I think for even like the biggest Rutgers optimist, you kind of have to really twist your brain into a pretzel to kind of talk yourself into a win in this one. Washington, outside of the number 1 team in the country, has won 22 straight games at home. The ways you talk yourself into a win is Washington is on an emotional short week where they had such a huge comeback win on the opposite coast. They have all these injuries. They're playing, I think, the 4th or 5th game in 4 or 5 weeks, whereas Greg Schiano is typically very good off a bye. I'll believe it when I see it. Last year, that November bye, Greg Schiano talked about how he stripped the defense down to the studs, made things a lot more simple, kind of changed out some starters, and the results kind of speak for themselves, where they weren't a great defense, but they were at least average. I'm going to say Washington wins this one 41-34. So I have Rutgers covering. I have the over hitting, but I just can't in good conscience even begin to think of Rutgers winning this game out in Seattle. I think Washington presents, like Richie said, a lot of the biggest boogeymen that Rutgers has struggled with for a long time, because I think Rutgers is, especially with like the playmaking style, extend play type quarterbacks that Demond Williams is, that's just like the ultimate kryptonite for a Greg Schiano defense. So I think he'll have a great day, if not a career day, against Rutgers. Jonah Coleman can kind of pick his yardage number. I feel like, especially if he's got 19 receptions in just 5 games. He had 23 all of last season. So clearly his game has developed significantly over from last year to this year. So if he's also a weapon out of the backfield, that's just another element that Rutgers really hasn't had to deal with this year. So I don't see Rutgers winning this one. You really have to have 7 or 8 things that Rutgers hasn't done this year all go their way in order to win against Washington. So that's the way I see it. Christian, you've been very generous with your time. Tell our fans where we can find your work and where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, on social media, I'm on Twitter, which I still call it and always will.
I do too.
Just at Christian Caple. My website is on Montlake, OnMontlake.com. You can also find me at On Montlake on YouTube as well.
Awesome. Any other questions for us about Rutgers before we head out of here?
I think we about got it covered.
Perfect. Well, for me and Richie, this has been another edition of the Night Report podcast, signing off.